Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Our neighbor in the north, not China, Nepal, needs to be discussed. Nepal is a brotherly nation with a lot of ethnic, religious, and cultural togetherness with India. But of course, we still find Nepal is on the far end as far as our friends is concerned. Our friend list is concerned. To discuss this, I have with me Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan, who has a very, very good understanding of the region. Of course, Sir has actually taken us through the story of the Northeast, the story of Myanmar, now is Nepal, and then, of course, just as a preview, I will also call him back to understand Bhutan. But, sir, good afternoon and welcome to the show. And let's stick with Nepal right now. There's a lot of activity within Nepal, the Chinese threat, and everything else along with it, sir. Just your opening comments. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you, Adi. Always wonderful to be on your show. Uh, I love the concept of speaking straight, of speaking truthfully, and of speaking with knowledge. Nepal has been a country that has been particularly very close to my heart, very close to the center of the study that I have done. And also, I have been in Nepal for a long period of time. Uh, I'm not sure if you all aware that I was India's defense advisor or defense attaché at the Indian Embassy in Nepal from 2004 to 2007. This was the time when the second Jan Andolan was going on, as well as the Maoist rebellion was at its peak. So I've been watching, studying, dealing with, and meeting the protagonists involved. So it's a marvelous time to actually explain to everybody what Nepal actually means because this is something it's very, very close. I'm from the Gorkha Rifles. I have traveled extensively in Nepal, from the east to the west, many, many times. Trekked in Nepal, traveled in Nepal, lived in Nepal, speak Nepalese and a number of other dialects. So I always enjoy discussing Nepal. So thank you for calling me, Adi.
Absolutely a pleasure, sir. Sir, I want to break this discussion down to three, four aspects of it. One, let's talk about the political instability in Nepal. Two, let's talk about the people itself. What are the people thinking? What do they want? Because we hear a lot of different voices coming out from Nepal. I read a lot of Nepalese opinion posts. I follow a few, retired generals and stuff like that from the Nepalese army, and they write quite extensively on LinkedIn and stuff like that. I read them, and one really realizes there are very contrary views and very strong contrary views who don't want to blend in with each other. The third, let's talk about the economy, the money structure within the country, and of course, the last part of the discussion would be how China influences all this stuff together. I want to keep China at the end because that's the main crux of our discussion. Because with all that we will discuss, we will be able to understand how China is actually playing its game there. So let's start with the political instability. So we have Mr. Prachanda again going through a no confidence motion, and political instability has been the name of the game in the country. So how do you see this? Is it normal? Is it something that we are seeing again after the monarchy got removed? How is it? How do you look at all this stuff in Nepal, sir?
Okay, about Prachanda now. Now, when Prachanda got elected as the prime minister, there were two things he did uh, which went against his agreement with Sher Bahadur Dioba. In the recent elections of Nepal, it was the Nepalese Congress that had actually got more seats than Prachanda and more seats than Oli. So, the first discussion that Prachanda had with Sher Bahadur Dioba of the Nepalese Congress was that I will support you and Sher Bahadur will be the prime minister. But then he went behind and also spoke to Oli and said, "You support me, I'll be the prime minister. and we'll leave Sher Bahadur out of the run. So when he did that and he cobbled together the slight majority, he was able to become the prime minister. But amongst the discussions that he had had with Mr. Oli was the election of a president who would be more, who would favor Mr. Oli and his party and not Prachanda. So when the discussion and the election, the Nepalese president elections are due next month, and there too, like India, they have the ballot within the legislator. That means the legislators uh, elect the president and not the people. So, whereas Prachanda wanted a, a president who would support him and not Mr. Oli, and when he broke that agreement, he also went to Sher Bahadur and said, "Look, I will support the president that you want, and we will do it together. I can drop Oli today." That's the first issue of what could have happened. The second is that even if Mr. Oli drops the the as he is done today, he has he's taken out his party from the coalition. Prachanda gets 60 days. So in these 60 days, the president's election would be over, and the new president would have been elected. And then Prachanda will again see who he can get together to cobble a new majority for himself and to continue in government. Because once he has a president who is who favors his thought process, which he feels that he will elect a president who will favor his thought process, he will get to stay on in power further. Now, I've met Prachanda. I met Prachanda when he was the chairman of the Maoist insurgency group that was fighting the king and his army in 2005-6. I met him after the king abdicated. He came to the Indian embassy. And I am absolutely clear that Prachanda is a survivor. He knows what he's doing. He, in one breath, is anti-India. In the other breath, is pro-India. So do not take anything that Prachanda says uh, in a way that Prachanda has any real, uh, any real wisdom that will come out of him. Prachanda is clear. He is for Prachanda and he wants to stay there in power for as long as possible. So I wouldn't believe anything that Prachanda says. The basic reason why he's dropped Oli is that he wants to elect a president that he wants.
Mm.
Post that, he will cobble together another minority majority.
Just a little bit of a follow up to this. How much of an influence does India have within their politics? I mean, of course, it's not overt, but uh, is there the India factor that plays into their domestic politics within Nepal, sir?
It's an easy question to answer and also a difficult one because you feel you have them with you. You feel that they will come and discuss everything with you, but they can do something totally opposite.
Mm.
So I wouldn't put it past Prachanda to have spoken to the Indian ambassador, passed the message, look, this is what I'm planning, but I've done totally opposite. It's happened to us before, Adi. It happened to us in 2007. It happened when they were passing the interim constitution. They have their ideas of what they want to do. They'll say yes to us, they'll say yes to the Chinese, but do exactly what they feel they want to do. And in their way of thinking is, since they can't fight either of us, say yes both ways, but do exactly what you want, and then it becomes a fait accompli. So we might think we have We have a communication with Prachanda? Of course we have. We feel that we are close to Sher Bahadur Dioba? Of course we have. We were through to Batarai also? Absolutely. Batarai had studied in the JNU. Lots of friends there. But the end point is that Prachanda or Batarai or Sher Bahadur Dioba will do exactly what they want. And they are masters at double speak. And so also is Mr. Oli. They're masters at double speak. So I wouldn't put anything past them. Any agreement which they have with you, any piece of paper which they have signed, can be abrogated in an instant if it doesn't suit
That's an interesting
them.
way of
But
doing
they
things.
will
And
never say no to you, ever.
ah,
The Nepalese politician will never say no to you.
so what you're basically saying is that Nepal, whatever is happening, needs to be kept a very close track with regards
Yeah,
to.
and that's why when people talk of the Chinese influence in Nepal, everything is fleeting, Adi. Their influence is based on that moment.
Hmm, 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 hmm.
And Prachanda can abrogate anything. He can go tomorrow to Beijing, meet with Mr. Shi, come back and then do exactly the opposite. So that's the issue.
That is
It was
interesting
very,
because,
very interesting studying them.
yeah, of course, and that's why I was just trying to say that that is very interesting because that's the sign of a live country, who's basically trying to keep its own interests together. So, once you look at our neighborhood and you have a country like Pakistan, which is intrinsically, and I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I think, in my opinion, intrinsically, the country is dead uh, inside. There's nothing to hold the country together. But here you're saying Nepalese would say yes and then do what they feel like. So that tells you that the
Absolutely.
country is alive
Absolutely.
from the inside. They're not dead. They're not.
Absolutely.
They have their interests
I,
foremost.
I, I
And
must tell you a very interesting story, Adi,
so,
which which will, you know, which elucidates this particular statement of mine. I was in Nepal during the Jan Andolan 2, 2006. And as the Jan Andolan parties, the seven major political parties, and Prachanda's armies, as they say, were walking towards Kathmandu. They were on the ring road and they were to enter Kathmandu. But every day that they would come closer, by 6:37 in the evening, they would break off for dinner. All right. But the line from which they would break off would be the line they would come next morning and start again. So they would start at 11:30 in the morning, and they would make noise till 6:37 in the evening. They would break off. Then the police, the army, and the Maoists would all get together in a local hotel, have a drink, curse India, and then start their flags next morning again. So I was a DA, and uh, when I was a DA in Nepal, my the army chief was General J. Singh. So he gave me a call once, and he said, I need a feedback from you 6 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening, exactly what they're doing. Because things were becoming serious, the media was making so much noise, and all that nonsense was going on. So I told him, sir, the news that I give you at 6, can I give it at 7 in the evening? So he says, okay. And I said, the one in the morning, sir, has no sense at all because there's no one there in the morning. They, they will come back at 11. And the surprising thing is that the army also has not pushed the line. There's no one on that line. So they could easily have gone and taken positions 2 kilometers away or 10 kilometers away to make the Janandolan walk a little longer. But they too would agree. that the Jan Andolan would come from the point at which they stopped at 7 in the evening that day. So they all brothers, all mixed up. The situation is very clear, Adi, that in this process, Nepalese are focused upon what they feel is correct, how they feel are their key interests, and everyone else is expendable here. All ideologies are expendable here.
That is, I mean, fair enough. Okay. It's an interesting thing that, but it's very fluid, sir. And
That's the
today's friends
interesting
are
thing.
tomorrow's terrible enemies, and
No,
tomorrow's
no, they're
terrible
not
enemies.
enemies. They're great friends.
Huh.
They are enemies only for the time they're in parliament.
Huh, boy, that's what. Today's friends
It's
are tomorrow's enemies, and tomorrow's enemies are day
are eating
after's
and
best
drinking
friends.
together. They'll be
Yeah.
eating and drinking together in the same hotel or in the same house and cursing whom they feel should be cursed.
Which brings me to the peoples. I'm sure with the advent of, I won't say globalism, but of course the advent of the internet, which has created sort of a revolution. And we see, I mean, when I go on to Instagram for that matter, and you search Nepal, you have these young kids in Nepal doing a whole lot of things. I mean, the same stuff which happens in India, dancing videos and this and that and everything. So the internet revolution has actually taken place pretty hardcore in Nepal, and people have started reading. Of course, interestingly, I have a few Nepalese friends who are following me on this platform as well, and they're pretty interested in what's happening strategically with regards to China and India and everything like that. So, and some of the comments are pretty smart. Uh, what I want to ask you is, how aware are the people of the reality around them, and how much of the people's nuance actually changes the mind of the government in Nepal? Because till, I would say, till Oli, it wasn't so. I mean, people were in another direction. Oli Saab was in another direction. Correct me if I'm wrong, sir. How much is the influence of people on the government?
Every party, Adi, has a core group which who decides what that party should do.
Hmm.
The Maoist parties or the communist parties, which first started in 1951 as a mirror to the Indian communist parties, have split 18 times, with each in a different ideology, though I don't know how they can come with so many ideologies, each having a slightly different ideology than the other. So ideology is not there at all. 18 splits in a particular party means there's no ideology.
Hmm.
The second issue is that in their race to be the prime minister, they can split 10 times more because there's a core support group, right? That decides how a particular party is to decide. Some of these core support groups may have 20 members in the parliament, some may have 10, some may have 5. Everything's a deal. If I give you my support, what is the deal for me? It happened when we were dealing with the situation of Madhes. It happened when we were dealing with the constitution. It happened at all issues that eventually they did what they had inside deals with. There was no issue. There was the King's Party, which is called the Rapapa or the RPP, Rashtra Prajapantri Party, that supports the king. They also at times will support the Nepal Congress, of whom they were very against during the Jan Andolan. And the Nepal Congress also, as we saw, supported Prachanda at a particular period of time. And after a while, when Prachanda did ditch them, they decide to sit in the. So ideology is not the story here. The core group has decided that this is the way to go, but the main core issue is who's going to be the prime minister and for how long. So I don't put anything past them to change as quickly as they want, and it should help them out. And the main issue is how to stay in power for the longest period of time. There are no enemies. There are no permanent enemies. There are no permanent friends in politics. They just do whatever suits them at that particular point.
How opportunistic of them, sir.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's how politics is, of course. If
But
I, if,
Nepal itself, Adi, is, when you to understand Nepal, going to Kathmandu gives you only 1/10 of the view of Nepal. Kathmandu has a core group that supports the king because the 200, 250 families that were a part of Kathmandu's elite still support the king because they are the top businessmen, they are the bank owners, they are the business owners, they are the money people. But Kathmandu East, that is East Nepal, has a totally different view to their political agenda. The tribes of the Rais, Limbus, Tamangs, who populate the east of Nepal or East Nepal, have a totally different view of what they're looking at. Some of them supported the Prachanda during the Jan Andolan, some didn't support Prachanda. But main thing was at that particular period that they were looking at Khambuvan and Limbuvan. That means separate areas which which suited their particular tribe. The Rais, Limbus, and Tamangs are the main.
hmm,
Similarly, in West Nepal, you have the Gurungs and the Magars. The Magars are the Puns and all the others whom we recruit. And in the South Nepal is the Madhes, the four districts of Madhes, which actually have up to almost 50% of the population of Nepal. But the reason why Madhes can't vote as one is because in the delineation of seats, the Nepalese constitution has delineated seats in such a way that the Madheshi parties can never get together to vote as one. And as a result, could never have the majority that otherwise Madhes would have got if they had been permitted to vote as one people. And all these separate groups of people, the center of Kathmandu, the east in Nepal, the west in Nepal, and the Madhes, are have totally different ideologies and thought processes. So that's something that we need to understand before we start judging Nepal for the decisions that Nepal takes.
yeah, a lot of people, I guess, judge Nepal with regards to
An
logic.
odd statement made in Kathmandu.
Yeah, logic and all. I was actually
Yeah.
going to say that the appeasing statement, actually, if I may add, maybe directed towards anyone. As a matter of fact, uh, we also have India appeasing statements. Not that it's all the other way around.
No, no, it
Uh,
can't be.
yeah,
Adi, it's very clear when you're in Nepal and you study the history of Nepal, is that in their foreign office, I think it's called Shashi Bhavan, when you go there, they have quoted the founder king, Prithvi Narayan Shah, where he says that Nepal is a yam between two boulders. The northern boulder is China, and the southern boulder is India. And all it looks at is that how does that yam survive between these two boulders. This survival issue has given Nepal the ability to switch at any point that it perceives as being favorable to them.
one can understand where they're coming from. There's no question about it. I mean, put yourself in their shoes, you would also do the same thing. So,
Absolutely. It's
yeah,
just too small a country. And if they perceive themselves as a yam, well, that's how they're going to survive.
indeed, indeed, sir. What about the factor of, uh, I mean, we were talking offline before with regards to economy, and you mentioned that they don't have an economic setup, which is where my main contention comes for a country, sir. Here is a country who wants to play the big game between the two boulders, as you say, but has not done anything with regards to development of an economic structure beyond tourism, and that to the wrong kind. So where did the Nepalese economic structure go wrong, sir?
Adi, the Nepalese economic structure never started. Uh, since it was a kingdom, let's go back to the 1700s. The Shah dynasty had unified Nepal. Nepal had a strong army, and with that army, they were able to advance as far as Dehradun at one particular point. Kangra down to where what we call Uttarakhand was actually with the Nepalese, and they would actually be able to decide the kings of Uttarakhand in various battles. Once the British came in, that means post the Anglo Gurkha Wars of 1804, 1805, 1814, 1815, the Nepalese kingdom shrunk to between the rivers of Mechi, Anchal, and Kosi. And because they had tried to fight the British, they also lost their holdings in the Tarai. In 1756, previous this, they'd had a battle with Tibet. And this battle with Tibet used to be continuous, Adi. And they were threatening Lhasa. During the time when they were threatening Lhasa, the government in the kingdom of Lhasa, that means the Tibetan Dalai Lama or the kingdom then, asked for the help from the King Empire, that is Qing, the Chinese emperor, who interceded on their behalf and defeated the Nepalese. And I think it was 1785 where they signed the Treaty of Thapatali, the treaty at Thapatali with the Tibetans and the Chinese, where the Nepalese king agreed to pay obeisance to the Chinese emperor. Every 5 years, uh, gifts as well as uh, other goods would go to the Chinese emperor, paid by as an obeisance and war reparations from the king of Nepal. In fact, the Chinese emperor would refer to the king of Nepal as a Wang. That means one of the kings under his empire. That happened in the Treaty of Thapatali. But once the British became stronger and they took over, they never colonized Nepal, they colonized India, but allowed Nepal to have a, uh, an independent kingdom, but under the residency of a British officer. And they used to be called the British Residency, the British resident, whose embassy was where the Indian embassy and the British embassy are now in Kathmandu. When that happened, the Nepalese decided to stop paying obeisance to the Chinese king because that coincided with the breakup of the Chinese empire. It also coincided with the time when Tibet became independent. But the countries in this region were all very weak. So when the countries in this region were weak because their kingdoms were finishing off and had been moth eaten from inside, as the Chinese called it, the Nepalese decided that they didn't need to pay obeisance to the empire in China and decided to become a part of the Brits. When the British went away in 1947 and the PLA and Mao won the rest of China by 1948-49. One of the first things that Mao declared was that Nepal was one of the five fingers of the palm that was China. Nepal, Tibet, Burma, Ladakh, uh, these were the five fingers that needed to be unified with the Chinese kingdom. And at that time, King Mahendra was the king, and he immediately requested India for help. And you'll be surprised to know that from 1954-55, there was an Indian military training team that actually manned the frontiers of Nepal against Tibet. After India lost the 1962 war, the king realized that India had no capability to protect them. And therefore, quietly asked the Indian military training team to leave. And by 1967-68, the complete Indian training team had left Nepal. And then started the overtures towards China for the simple reason they needed to survive. And from 1967 onward, these overtures to China came to a point at which they just as they had done at Thapatali, they did now. They said, look, we are too small to fight, but we'd like to be close to both of you. The King Birendra then came up with the zone of peace, which said that Nepal would be the zone of peace between China and India. And then they thought that they would take advantage, this BRI, they would take advantage and the be able to take and make money through the trade that would cross through Nepal into India, which is what BRI was supposed to do for Nepal. Give them great roads so that any trade moving from India to Tibet and Nepal and China, or from China down to India, would have to come through Nepalese territory. And they thought their economy would be based on that. That has not happened. So their economy has no industry. It was based on tourism. It was based on aid. And unfortunately, the aid has dried up and the tourism too has dried up, because in the beginning, when Western tourists started coming into Nepal, they Nepal did not lay down the type of tourists who would come there. So when they started getting tourists who wouldn't spend money in Nepal, that obviously affected their economy. And then the Western tourists during the time of the hippie movement were mainly poorer Western tourists who would come there for indulging in the habit of taking drugs. And Nepal became a paradise for drugs, for ganja, for marijuana, and all these places. It took a long time for Nepal to get out of that process that we're not a paradise for taking for the drug trade. But by then the damage had been done because these tourists didn't help in getting money to Nepal. So as a result, all the roads have either been made by India, the Brits, or by the Chinese as aid. And they continue to look at that aid to help provide for everything. Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Even now, the reputation that the Nepalese hills carry is not very um, not very clean, if I may.
You're right.
And
Infrastructure is not there, Adi.
yeah,
People are poor, and because people are poor, they the higher reaches, the Himalayan reaches, most of the people are porters. Sherpas, as they say, to help the Everest mountaineers
Climbers.
climb the Everest. Tremendous people, tremendously capable, tremendously courageous, tremendously strong, but no education and unable to generate the money that they need to survive as a nation.
Which brings me to the main crux and my, I mean, of course, not, it's the last in the series, but the most important question with regards to China. Uh, you've spoken about the Chinese, the history between both the countries, and that's interesting to know because I personally did not know about the allegiance that the Chinese paid, and of course, our debacle in the 1962 war is, it cost us a lot. There's no question about it. We just talk about the war defeat, but it cost us a lot. There's no question about it. What I want to ask you is about this whole influence within China. You spoke about the BRI, which a lot of us fear with regards to this railway line, which is proposed to come into the Tarai and creates a whole new avenue of a threat to Uttar Pradesh area and central India and stuff like that. And how do you see this particular thing happening? And of course, the terrain in which this railway needs to be built is also very contentious. It's not something which is easy. Uh, what kind of a relationship does Nepal potentially want with China, with this whole line and everything like that? And do you think this is another way of Nepal trying to balance itself out with India and saying, okay, if you're not going to help us, I have to go the other way around? Or is this the Chinese forcing their way through?
As I explained to you, Adi, when I was in Nepal, our ambassador was before Ambassador Mukherjee was Ambassador Shamsaran, who later became the Foreign Secretary. And at that time, Ambassador Shamsaran used to say that Nepal is India open, and we had, and there was a 10-year plan before that to bring in railway lines till Kathmandu from India. We didn't go beyond that. We didn't go beyond our plans to build the railway line, which we should have done. We should have created the infrastructure in Nepal when we could, right? And we have not gone beyond building the Mahendra Rajmarg, that is the ring road in Kathmandu, or the east-west highway, of which a part which we have built. If Nepal was and is India open, then we should have taken the initiative or gone through with our promises of taking this railway till Kathmandu.
Hmm.
We didn't do that. It is now 40 years since then. I was there in 2006. It's almost 20 years since the time. 10 years ago, before that, this plan was there. This BRI railway is not a new plan. It was there on the books about 6 to 8 years back. They've made these railway lines on paper. Much of what China does, or much of what Nepal says, is trying and balance the two powers. To say that, look, China is going to give us this, so you better give it to us faster. There is a problem, Adi. If you, I have driven on that highway, the Kodari highway, 100 kilometers from Kathmandu towards the north is the is the road is the Tibetan gate called the Kodari gate, and from Kodari onwards, almost 2,000 kilometers further is Lhasa. To that road was extensively damaged during the last earthquake of 2015, extensively damaged, and it is a ecologically fragile zone. To build a railway through that, though I don't put it past the Chinese, will be an extremely difficult engineering feat because even the highway gets cut very, very often. And then to maintain that highway or that railway will take great effort, which I don't know and I don't think the Chinese are willing to do so right now. Otherwise, they would have built it. But there is a problem, Adi, is that The kingdom of the south, India, does not follow through on its promises. And China is very, very far away. Beijing is another 2,000 kilometers away from Tibet or from Lhasa. Does Nepal form in the is Nepal in the geopolitical importance of the world? Is Nepal that important that Beijing would like to put in a huge amount of investment? And the fact that Beijing has not followed through on this road and instead moved to Gwadar is because they don't foresee any kind of advantage of coming through Nepal. For us, we have a major problem is that Nepal sits on the head of the Indo-Gangetic Plain. And from the time you come into Kathmandu and you flow southward, there are no major obstacles where a defensive line could be formed to prevent China from coming in. So if China was to have brought her PLA into Nepal, India would be in a very difficult position security wise. The second issue is that India is a middle riparian state to Nepal. All of India's waters come through, in that region, come through Nepal. And Kosi, the mother of sorrows, as the river is known, is a river that overflows every year. We had built some headworks in Nepal about 50 years ago. Those headworks are full of silt and don't work. And as a result, things have deteriorated immensely. So there are a great amount of, we have not handled Nepal well. There is a lot of neglect in our projects that we have done with Nepal. But because Nepal is not so important in Beijing's scheme of thought processes, that she doesn't seem to get much from Beijing either. So that's the problem with Nepal. She has an extremely important location, geographical location. She sits at the head of India's heartland, but at the same time is not important enough for China to do anything there as yet.
You've basically flipped a coin against all the propaganda, if I may. No, but that's see that's the reason why I wanted to have this conversation, because when you listen to the mainstream media, when you talk about the India-China relationship, all you hear is that the Chinese are going to come in and this and that and the other. My last little interjection, and just 30 seconds of your thought, because I'm sure you'll be able to answer this in a snap, is that the people in Nepal, do they actually like the Chinese, sir? That makes a big
Okay.
difference. Nepal is
As
quite an
I
exclusive
said,
country like this.
Adi, Nepal is not one people.
Yeah.
So you can't say who likes us and who doesn't. But what is clear is because as like I said, I have traversed the length and breadth of Nepal many times. I have lived in my soldiers' homes in East Nepal. I have lived in my soldiers' homes in West Nepal. I have paid pension from the western point of Mahendranagar to the eastern point of Dharan or maybe Bhojpur and Taplejung. There are two things which I want to put at rest is that the people of Nepal identify very closely with India. There is no doubt in their mind that our brother nation is India. They do not speak Han Chinese. They do not marry Han women.
Hmm.
They might have 20, 30, 100 cultural centers, the cultural centers that China has put up, but the people don't speak Mandarin. There is no cultural affinity at all that the people of Nepal share with the mainland of China, unlike what they share with us. the
Yeah.
roti beti rishta. It is up to us as the mother nation, as the elder brother nation, whatever, elder sister nation, whatever, to keep them close to us and not get involved in a competition with them. We recruit, we used to recruit, it stopped now during the Agniveer. Otherwise, we used to recruit almost 1,000 soldiers a year from there. We have 128,000 pensioners, the Nepal origin Indian Army pensioners, who take back a pension of almost 4,000 plus crores in a year, which is a huge chunk of the Nepalese economy. If you were to multiply this 128,000 with about six family members who are dependent on our Indian Army pensioner, you have something like 10 lakhs, 15 lakh people who identify with the fact that India is their rosy roti, that India is from where they get their salt.
That's a big connection. We
And
must.
to not recruit people from Nepal would be cutting our own legs off with our own axe. It's that important. I mean, where in any other country in the world would you have 130,000 people directly drawing pay from you? So please, no one should forget what we mean to Nepal and what the Nepalese think of us. But like I said, there are different Nepalese in different places. Our view is that our people go to Kathmandu and decide that this is how Nepal feels of us. I would say go live like I lived in various parts of Nepal, in the east of Nepal. Live with our soldiers and see what they think of you. See what the villages of all the villages along that area think of you. These are the border villages. 51% of Nepal's population are the Madhesis.
Hmm.
They are they identify themselves with India. That's why they're the Madhes. They speak either Eastern UP or Bihari or
Yeah,
whatever
yeah,
the
yeah.
languages are.
Hmm. Hmm.
How can you even take that away from us? Nobody looks Adi at the advantages we have there. The advantages that we have dealing with a nation which is actually ours culturally and in their heart. But if we as a nation or if we as a political system or we as a bureaucratic system decide that these are all disadvantages instead of advantages, then we will come up with all these other foolish narratives. But to me, I'm clear. Nepal can belong to no one else. It belongs to Nepal. The people of Nepal clearly identify themselves with India first, and these are huge advantages which we lose out because we don't see. And Kathmandu is not the place you should be looking at what Nepalese think of us. Go to the villages in east, west, and central Nepal. There's a totally different perspective there.
Indeed. I must say, sir, this is a educative conversation because uh, we take a lot of, I think, because of the sense of growing India, I think a lot of things are taken at face value rather than an intrinsic study. With our neighborhood, I think that is what is required, and it's interesting the kind of perspective that you put across. I'm sure a lot of the viewers are going to be quite shocked with certain things that you've said because the narrative is completely different, and sadly, I think that is what is influencing a lot of conversations within this country about Nepal. But sir, thank you so much for bringing new light onto this perspective, and I think we need to have a couple of more conversations on this subject because it's. I don't think we've been able to do complete justice to the country in one talk. So I'm going to invite you once again to actually go forward and dig into a little further detail into the Chinese aspect, and I would look at how people kind of perceive this particular thing. because it's something that needs a little more understanding from the people of our country itself. So when we interact with
Hmm.
Nepal or Nepalese people, we should have that in our mind that
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
reality. Yeah,
You know, thank you, Adi. We've had a great conversation. But I would only want, from people is that they must study history and geography and culture together. If they study the geography of a nation vis-a-vis another nation, study it strategically. Similarly, look at history and culture strategically, and the answers are in front of you. So I do that. I'd like to close with what I read when I was reading The Revenge of Geography, uh, which said that to know a place, walk slowly, looking at each point extremely slowly, and to make up your mind then, as you have walked slowly and observed each issue, is then bring all the frames together. The conclusions you get are different. Our mainstream media has no time for this. I don't blame them. They're looking for a different perspective. But I feel and have always felt like this, that the advantages in Nepal are ours to lose. Lovely speaking with you, Adi.
I don't think there's anything further one can say onto that. That's
Thank you.
quite a boundary in terms of a closing comment. Sir, thank you so much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you. Jai.